This is episode 15 of season 1 of Babylon 5, Grail. This is not an arc episode, and we see that someone is coming on board the station on a transport who the Minbari seem to hold in very high regard, but neither Sinclair nor Garibaldi have any idea who's coming. And fortunately, Garibaldi is renowned for being a fast eater, so he's just got enough time to finish eating before he goes to get changed into dress uniform so that they can greet this individual who's coming on board, despite the fact that they have absolutely no idea who he is. Delen's attitude is quite funny here, because she's sort of saying to the commander that he's just got enough time to change, as in get up your bottom and do it, because otherwise I will not be amused. So elsewhere in the station, somewhere in down below, a chap called Juice is putting pressure on a little guy called Jinxo to find him new ways to get his dubious goods around the station unseen by security. And he's asking Jinxo because he was involved with the construction of the station, although arguably not with the actual insides of it, more with the big construction pieces that support the exterior of the station. And he's able to put this pressure on because Jinxo owes him money, and he wants 100,000 credits to pay off his debts with him, all the data that he needs. And if he doesn't get one of those two things, then difficulties are going to ensue for Jinxo's well-being. And we see that an unfortunate lady called Miriam Running Deer comes to a sticky end, seemingly at the hands of Kosh. So basically, Jinxo is thereby encouraged to get a move on by Juice and get the cash or get the data. We then switch over to somewhere where we've not seen before, which is the Ombudsman's Court on the station. So there are judicial proceedings happening, basically. And basically a Grey, as in a Roswell-style Grey, is being prosecuted on Babylon 5 in this court because apparently a human gentleman's grandfather was kidnapped by the Grey's grandfather, who, when asked a question, responds with some sort of symbol, which I dare say has some sort of significance if you're into your sort of Roswell theories, but I didn't really get it. I'll talk more about this scene later. The gentleman who's come on board from the transport is called Aldous Gaich, and you get a bit of a sort of a Gandalf vibe out of him. He's got a nice walking staff, very solid, and he's dressed in a sort of creamy white kind of robe, so it's clearly sort of the trappings of his office. And it turns out that he's looking for the Holy Grail, the Last Crusade, Last Supper, King Arthur, Holy Grail. And Garibaldi is doing what sort of 50% of the viewers are doing, and basically rolling his eyes, going, "What the hell?" But Aldous explains that having exhausted Earth as a place to find the Grail, he's going to be speaking to the ambassadors various to see if they can help, as he and his brothers in the Order broaden their search. Although it turns out that he is actually the Order. There are no brothers, but he's got full access to the funds that the Order has, and this is what he's doing. And Delen calls him a true seeker, and she feels that it's very honourable that he's dedicated himself to this task, regardless of whether or not it's, even vaguely sort of credible. And she notes that Sinclair is also a true seeker, even if he doesn't recognise himself as such. And that's quite interesting. That's telling of how much regard she has for him. So Jinxo gets caught trying to lift Aldous's bank card when he's trying to change some credits, and he is brought before the Ombudsman in the court that we saw earlier. In MedLab, Miriam has been brought in from down below, and she's been the victim of a mind wipe that's basically left her barely functional. So she's kind of okay physically, but mentally she's pretty much gone, and she's going to need extensive rehabilitation. Garibaldi arrives into the med bay and would very much like to clean out down below, but Sinclair notes that most of the people there are just desperate souls who came looking for work on the station and then got trapped, lacking the funds to get transport home again. When Garibaldi realises whose mind has been wiped, he's even more determined to go into down below, because the lady was his star witness against Juice, and we knew that the trial was imminent. So Jinxo is up before the Ombudsman and essentially facing banishment from Babylon 5, with his fare off paid by the Ombudsman, curiously enough, given that a lot of people seem to get stuck there because they can't afford the fare out. But as he's got a good history as a construction worker on all the Babylon stations, and so could get work elsewhere, the Ombudsman feels that it's fair enough to move him along, basically. For some reason, he doesn't want to go, despite the fact that he's got Juice hanging over him and a limited amount of time to get his funds or the data. So, to his surprise, Aldous gets up from the back of the court and speaks with the Ombudsman, and against the Ombudsman's own better judgment, he allows Aldous to take responsibility for Jinxo, also known as Thomas. And as expected, the case against Juice can't proceed because Garibaldi needed Miriam's testimony to try and take down his sort of protection racket that he runs, and so Juice walks free. Thomas explains to Aldous that every time he's left a Babylon station that he's been working on, it's either blown up or vanished. He calls this the Babylon curse, and that's why he's so determined not to leave Babylon 5. Aldous doesn't laugh. He says he understands obsession very well. Jinxo believes he is the curse. Aldous listens to his story, how he is contracted to the firm that builds the Babylon stations, so he's had to keep working on them. The first two sabotaged by parties unknown, the third exploded, always when he was on leave from the job. The fourth he didn't take leave from, but it vanished just after its completion, warping out of existence as his shuttle left. Aldous says, though, that his nickname is wrong. It should be Lucky. Aldous notes we often make negatives out of positives, which I think is very true. And basically he feels that, from his point of view, Jinxo was exactly where he was supposed to be, in that had he not been where he'd been, he would have lost his life by now. So actually, he's a very, very lucky guy to have made it out when he did. Meanwhile, Franklin and Ivanova have identified a possible cause for the mind wipes. Having ruled out a mechanical cause, they searched for a biological cause, and they identified a creature called a narcoline feeder from Centauri space that's semi-sentient and capable of producing the observed effects. Garibaldi notes that Juice's people would be well placed to smuggle such a creature onto the station. So Sinclair goes to speak to Londo, who of course is in the casino, working hard as ever. And Londo says that they ran into these creatures during their sort of colonization days. And then it gradually dawns on him that the reason Sinclair's asking him about the creature is that there's one on the station. And he refills his glass before legging it to his quarters to hide himself away under high security. Clearly he's not a fan of these things, but he does promise to get VA to send Sinclair the files on them. In Glenn's quarters, she explains that the Minbari haven't found the Grail to their knowledge, but Aldous thanks them profusely for trying. Interestingly, Lanier and Delenn reveal a caste system in Minbari culture. They are a religious caste, but it is also a warrior caste. Jinxo is surprised that the Minbari have even tried to help them, given what happened in the war, and Delenn explains that the warrior caste wouldn't understand this, so they won't tell them, so as not to confuse them. She says that when the warrior and religious castes do reach agreement on something, a terrible power is unleashed, as the Earth-Minbari War demonstrated, and she hopes never to see it again in her lifetime. Meanwhile, Juice is promising Kosh a heartier meal, and orders his men to find Jinxo and the Ombudsman. Neither Kosh nor his encounter suit seem quite right. The voice is different, and there are no lights on the suit when the voice is sounding, which normally there are. Franklin has confirmed beyond reasonable doubt that the mind wipe was caused by a feeder now that he has the Centauri baseline data, which has been duly provided, to Garibaldi's surprise. Ivanova will look at transports from Centauri space, while Garibaldi speaks to Jinxo, who he noticed was talking to Juice in the courtroom, to see if he knows anything. Aldous and Jinxo are with Londo, who has discovered that the quarantine on the feeder's planet has been lifted, and he's getting it reinstated, budget be damned. It turns out the Veer has been efficient, and shortcutted Londo's attempt to get a fee out of Aldous, providing a data crystal on trade information the Centauri hold on anything Grail-like, with no strong positives it seems. Londo despairs of this helpful attitude, because it would have made him some credits, potentially. Jinxo is curious as to what led Aldous to this particular choice in life, and he explains that he was once an accountant for a very large company on Earth, but then lost his family on an accident whilst on a holiday to Mars. And after that, his numbers didn't add up anymore, and he grieved for a long, long time. Then left his job and met a man who believed in him. He took on his role as seeker on his death, and found that the numbers started to add up once again. And so basically, he found his meaning in life again. The Ombudsman is assaulted on a recess from a hearing, and Aldous and Jinxo are also confronted. But all of a sudden, Aldous uses his staff to knock the assailants down, so not really what we were expecting, perhaps. Shortly afterwards, Aldous declares Jinxo a worthy successor to his role, because he has demonstrated selflessness in staying on Babylon 5, hoping to protect others, whilst under threat from Deuce. Aldous' last stop is Ambassador Kosh, but on seeing him, Jinxo bolts, believing he will attack them, because he saw what happened to Miriam earlier. Deuce's goons catch up with him again, and this time Aldous can't stop them both. He's stunned, whilst Jinxo hides. Ivanova has tried to narrow the possibilities down, but it isn't easy. Garibaldi has found the Ombudsman has been taken, and Deuce is about to turn him into supper, with Aldous watching. Jinxo finds Sinclair and warns him about the feeder, taking him to Deuce's base. Sinclair calls in Garibaldi, telling him to follow his link signal as they go. Aldous offers himself in place of the Ombudsman, but the creature pauses and retreats back into the suit, before the suit starts to open when Aldous asks it to show itself and come into the light. Deuce and his men are uncertain about what's happening. In your face, species 8472, this is way earlier for a fully CGI creature, which is what emerges from the encounter suit. Garibaldi's tactical squad arrives, and most of Deuce's goons rabbit, but as they try to pin down the feeder, Deuce takes advantage of the situation to try and kill the Ombuds, who Jinxo is trying to help get out of the chair that he's tied into, and Aldous takes the shot meant for him, whilst Garibaldi and Sinclair take down the feeder. Sinclair gets a shot off at Deuce, but he escapes. Sinclair witnesses Aldous' last testament, making Thomas his heir and passing the quest for the Grail to him at his request. Aldous tells Thomas he can see the Grail as he passes away. Sinclair debriefs Kosh on Deuce's use of the fake encounter suit. Kosh asks why a couple of times, but when Sinclair notes that people are nervous not knowing what he looks like, he says, "Good." Very enigmatic, as ever. Sinclair is there to see Aldous' body off in the cargo bay. Delenn also arrives and notes that Aldous had found what he was looking for, a reason for life, for everything. He needed nothing else. It's the transport Mary Celeste that he's going to go out on. Garibaldi misjudged Jinxo because he does appear wearing the robes of the true Seeker. Delenn gives him a gift for Aldous' grave, looking at Sinclair as she mentions true Seekers again. Before he leaves, he reclaims the name Thomas, leaving Jinxo behind on the station. Garibaldi reassures Londo that the feeder is definitely dead, not just resting. Garibaldi reassures Londo and Villa it's being dissected, and that as long as there's noise around, they're safe. It's only quiet when it's about to strike. So hilarity then ensues, of course, as Londo slips quietly back inside his quarters and locks the door, leaving Veer in a very quiet corridor. The Mary Celeste heads out with Sinclair, Garibaldi and Ivanova watching from CNC. Ivanova says to Garibaldi's comment that there's been no boom today, as it jumps out, boom tomorrow. There's always a boom tomorrow. So, Grail, I think, comes in for a certain amount of stick with the fandom, because there are some elements to it, like the CGI for the feeder, which don't quite gel. by that I mean it's really well done for its day. It looks very organic and it looks very real, but it's kind of too bright for the scenes that it's in. And when you see its remains afterwards, it doesn't. The remains don't really look like the CGI creature looked like, because they went for sort of, real innards and gizzards on the floor rather than a sort of CGI remains. But I get why they did it, because they wanted it to bounce around and kind of drop down from ceilings and stuff like that, which it does quite believably. And you wouldn't have been able to pull that off trying to use a puppet to do that on the budget that they didn't have. So it's a compromise. And watching it again, I didn't actually mind it that much, because I understand now what their limitations were at the time. So maybe they were just overreaching a little bit, but that's okay. You've got to try these things, otherwise they won't learn anything. So I think it was that. Personally, I also found that the sort of the scene with the greys in it, or the grey in it, in the Ombudsman, was a little bit too strained. I think it was maybe the way it was acted, but it was almost a bit of a sort of behind the sofa moment for the wrong reasons. It was a bit cringeworthy. So I mean, I get it. I mean, it's funny. I get it. It's a good gag. The fact that you could actually get sued for abducting someone's ancestor in the past on Babylon 5. Some jurisdictional issues there, I feel, but otherwise I do kind of get it. I just don't think it quite worked here. Another random thought that I had when I was thinking about the commentary here was, how is communication handled? Trek obviously has the universal translator as a sort of MacGuffin for dealing with first contact with other species and so on. But how does a Narcoline feeder, which is only semi-sentient, manage passable English when it's from a Centauri planet? Yeah, I know. I'm a little bit. That's a little bit nitpicky of me, but maybe it brainwiped someone and got the information out of their head that way. I don't know. It's possible. Maybe. So this is one of those episodes where the A and B plots end up kind of smashing together at the end. Again, it feels a little contrived that Thomas would just jump into this new role. But then, why do people ever make life-changing decisions? Because it seems like the right thing to do at the time. Aldous upended his worldview and freed him from what was holding him back. But I suppose my question is, will this decision now hold him back in a different way? Maybe. But at the end of the day, it is, of course, his life. So who are we to judge? And yet, of course, we always do, despite it being an inherently subjective and personal issue that many nations fight very hard to protect. I like the actor David Warner, who plays Aldous. He could have come off as a bonkers crackpot, but I don't think he did. And in a cramped corridor, it was believable that he could use the fighting staff to take down two opponents. He's also been in Trek and Tron, which Peter Jurassic, who plays Londo, was in as well. So if he looks or sounds familiar when you rewatch it, that might well be why. It's worth considering the reactions of the ambassadors and their aides here. Both Delenn and Lanier are very, very keen to support him and offered us insight into the different attitudes of their casts in such matters. And Veer, interestingly, acts in a way that Londo clearly didn't expect, and we've seen Londo try on the Cash for Questions option in Believers before as well. In fact, Lanier is almost as giddy as Veer at being able to help, suggesting a degree of similar sort of just starting out so eager to please enthusiasm for their roles, both of them. So that's interesting, despite coming from very, very different cultures. And as an aside, the name of the transport on which Thomas leaves rang a bell, and having done a spot of research, it relates to an American ship from the 1800s that was mysteriously found abandoned, but showing no signs of piracy or heavy damage other than its lifeboat being missing. No survivors were ever found, although a story based on the real events is recounted by an imagined survivor. I suspect this was thrown in as a nod to the loss of the previous stations that Thomas worked on and survived. It's interesting to see a court in place on Babylon 5. It makes perfect sense given the size of the population, of course, and it's clearly kept busy by the likes of the inhabitants of Down Below, whose status is discussed in a little more depth in this episode, with the ability to get home when a job doesn't work out clearly far more challenging when you're on a space station. So again, it's this idea of Babylon 5 as a real sort of functional civilization sort of segment in space. I guess that's interesting here. So it's a sort of fleshing out of the detail of the place that a lot of thought has actually been given to how you might actually operate and keep one of these stations running in the longer term. That you've got to have, you've got to give thought to the actual societal issues that might arise in order to keep these places up and running. So, not an arc episode, some slightly strained moments, but still some interesting insights into the cultures of the various races, and of course some comedy at the end with Londo's newfound fear of silence, and Ivanova's oft-repeated "boom tomorrow" saying. Until next time, stay safe.